can I just say how absolutely fascinating it is that Debian is really struggling to survive, struggling to bring new maintainers, new developers in, and basically nobody cares. Nobody cares so much that you're not even seeing anyone try to triple-E it, embrace, extend, extinguish. It's kind of just slowly burning out as the years go on, and nobody's talking about it. Nobody wants to do anything about it. So a little while back, I talked about this post from the Debian project leader, Andres Till, alongside some other things, basically pointing out that a lot of people just kind of leave the project and don't say anything about it, leaving certain systems with no maintainer, but people think it's maintained. Other people pointing out that it's a nightmare to get involved with Debian. People don't want to report bugs because you have to report bugs through email and then reply through email. There's no, web interface for the bug tracker. And a lot of the systems that Debian use are kind of just not pleasant. Now, Debian is a very interesting project. So rather than just having a project leader, a project maintainer that sticks around for 10, 15 years, like a lot of projects do, a lot of projects, even if they're really old, still have their original people around. Debian has always had this position of let the community decide. Every year, they have a vote on who the project leader is going to be. And sometimes that ends up being the same person. There have been many cases where someone is a leader for multiple years in a row. But because of this system, it's led to this, where they have had a lot of people involved in the project, a lot of people running the project, and really, this system has kind of just been what Debian does, and kind of Debian alone. The way they do this is every single year, they send out an email to people being like, hey, do you want to run as a project leader? Are you interested? The slot's open. For 2026, this opened on the 7th of March and then closed on the 13th of March, so a little bit less than an entire week, about 6 days. Then you enter the campaign stage on the 14th, and this is the stage we are currently in, and then voting happens on the 4th of April, and then ends on the 17th. For this year of 2026, here are our nominations. Firstly is, probably going to butcher this, Shruti Chandran. Apologies if I butchered that. She just said, I would like to nominate myself. Okay, fair enough. Our second person is not a second person. This is actually Shruti sending an email again, and once again nominating herself because Debian does everything through a mailing list, and it is really confusing to know if your email was actually sent and if anyone actually saw your email, so she ended up double posting the email. Yeah. Our actual second person is this one here. Hector Oron Martinez. Or at least it would have been the second person. Apologies for sending this email one day late, but I was unable to get a hold of my key earlier. I have also been sick. As a good friend mentioned, it is better to be late than never. Therefore, I'd like to nominate myself for Debian Project Leader. Thanks very much for your consideration, and then a sign-off. Here's the problem though. Debian has very strict rules on when you can nominate yourself. Hi Hector, I'm sorry, the nomination period is clearly over, and the Constitution is clear that no candidate can be added after the nomination period has ended. So his nomination was not counted. What does that mean for Debian? Well, that means that they are running an election with a singular candidate. One person is in the election. Now, frankly, I don't care what her positions are. People have been arguing like, oh, she supports this thing and supports that thing. Oh, I don't actually care what her positions are. It is up to the Debian people to vote on whether they agree with them or they don't. I am far more interested in the fact that there is one person in the election right now, and what might surprise you is this is actually not the first time that this has happened. This is not the first time this has happened, and they, for some reason, had never actually done anything about this problem. So back in 2023, you had Jonathan Carter. In 2018, you had Chris Lamb. And in 2016, you had Mehdi Dogai. And in all of these cases, these people ended up being the Debian project leader. So we have Jonathan Carter here for actually a relatively long tenure. We had Chris Lamb for 2 years, and Mehdi Dogai for just a singular year. It is genuinely fascinating to me that you have a project as important as Debian, and firstly, there ever exists a situation where only one person is running to be the project leader, right? Like, imagine something like, I don't know, KDE. Imagine one person being interested in running the project, or even GNOME, or Arch Linux, or Fedora Linux, or any of these projects. Imagine there only being a single person interested in taking the role as the project leader. Anyone involved in those projects probably, can't even think of a case of that ever happening. But somehow, with a project as important as Debian, we've witnessed it. Not once, not twice, but at least 3 times from what I've checked. Now, this has happened with something like OpenSUSE, but OpenSUSE it's not considered as foundational of a project as something like Debian. This giant list of candidates was announced in an email on March 14th. We are now into the campaigning period. We have one candidate this year, Shruti Chandran. From there, for a few days, there were emails like this one. I'm concerned by the lack of candidates in the 2026 leader elections and disagree with denying potential candidates based on constitutional deadlines. Given the circumstances of a single candidate being guaranteed the position and the voting process now being pointless, exceptions should be made to restore a semblance of democratic values to the process. And that kind of set off a torrent of emails. I say torrent, but this is the Debian mailing list, so, it's still the Debian mailing list. There's people talking, but, quite active for Debian at least. Following all this going on, Hector did feel the need to reply. Hello all, I took a few days away and I'm back today finding lots of emails in several mailing lists. I'm struggling to go over all of it. However, I encourage Shruti to keep her participation and not withdraw the candidature. Yeah. Sorry, I've never said that word before. I do really feel secondhand embarrassment about all the mailing list behavior. We should be attempting to bring community to a higher stance level with our participation. I would like you to know, since I was the one doing the late nomination, that Shruti got all my support. Some people have been calling on the rules to be changed immediately, or allow this one more person to step in, or reset everything and go back to the start. But in situations like this, Debian does sort of have a contingency plan in place. It's just not being used before, or at least not being used against a single candidate. I also would prefer if there was more than one candidate. Perhaps changing the rules during the election isn't what we want. There's in fact 2 ways this could happen. Firstly, Shruti temporarily withdraw her nomination just in order to restart the nomination period. Is this really possible? I believe it is. And secondly, Shruti refuses to do this, and then a majority vote for NOTA. That is none of the above. Basically, you don't agree that any of the candidates should be running Debian, and everybody votes literally anybody else. Usually the purpose of that is to still be able to vote in the election, but not have to vote for somebody that you don't think should be a Debian project leader. Here it would be used as a way to basically just reset the election. Now, regarding her nomination, considering the fact that there have been cases of Debian project leaders being elected with no one else running, I could see why she wouldn't want to step down just as a way to sort of reset the election and let other people run. Also, this isn't the first time she has run. She ran back in 2025 against 3 other people. She ran in 2024 against 1 person. She ran in 2021 against 1 person again. And she ran in 2020 against 2 other people. So if she wants to be Debian project leader, and there is precedence for having an election with a singular person, this is kind of her year. Following this, there have been some mixed opinions about what should be done. Firstly, we have this one from Pierre-Elliott Becquieu French, I presume. How about we actually focus on the campaign rather than giving too much energy into what looks like poorly designed destabilization campaigns? The mail that started this thread comes from someone who, to my knowledge, never participated in Debian mailing lists or Debian at all. I think this should die out right now. Let the campaign happen. If Shruti fails to convince, the vote will tell. However, there was also an email from former Debian project leader Jonathan Carter. This was the leader just before Andreas Till. So he said, I'd like to add a third option after the elections. Propose a GR for a change in the voting process, a general resolution that if any candidates nominate themselves in the last 12 hours of the nomination process, then the nomination window extends by another 48 hours to allow someone who specifically wants to challenge that person to do so. It's perhaps not perfect, but it would catch a lot of cases that people are concerned about. Perhaps the exact definition and timeframes could do with some tweaking, but that's the general idea. That's the other fun part. There actually were 0 nominations until about 6 hours before the nomination period ended. So if she forgot, if maybe she had something to do or anything else like that, there was a very high probability of 0 people being in the election. Honestly, my guess is because she's run a number of years in the past, she wanted to wait until the last minute and see if anyone else was going to nominate themselves, because if nobody else nominates themselves, there's a pretty high chance you're going to get that position. And then Hector nominated himself, you know, the next day, right? I don't know. Like, I think that's a very compelling argument, right? If somebody nominates themselves right at the end of the election period, maybe you should probably extend it? Like, that seems to make sense to me. In response to that, Simon Richter said, I don't see the benefit of that because such a candidate must have been sufficiently disinterested to find it acceptable if no candidate stepped forward because that is someone else's problem, yet feel strongly enough about another candidate that they suddenly decide the time and commitment of being DPL is so insubstantial that they can decide that on a whim. I don't see one and intend to vote the same way as the last 2 elections with Shruti in the top position. As I said, I do see the possibility of wanting to game this very abusable system where you know that very few people are running, so you do step forward at that last moment as a way to sort of like sneak in there when nobody else is looking. Do I necessarily think that that is what has happened here? It's hard to say, but the result is still the same. You do have an election where one person is running. Jonathan Carter replies again, yes, their concerns have 0 impact on this. After talking to a few other people offline, I felt that this might be a good idea long before the nomination period ended. I'll provide more context after the election, and possibly to private as well, but it can and should really wait until the election is done. So basically, sort of cleaning up this loophole to make sure it can't really happen again. Do note, however, that Jonathan Carter was in a 0-person election, so I just want to make that clear. Granted, it wasn't the first year he got elected, that was a few years earlier. This was one of the years Indium already being a Debian project leader before that took place. Whilst it is an unofficial account, I do find it kinda crazy that the Debian account on Mastodon, which has obviously a lot of followers, never announced the election happening. It just didn't happen. This is like such a normal Debian thing where exists as if it's still like 1997, where if it doesn't happen on the mailing list, if it doesn't happen on the IRC, it might as well just not exist. Like nothing was announced anywhere except on the mailing list. And that's basically it. Now, voting doesn't begin until the 4th of April, and I'll be very curious to see how this plays out. Honestly, what I expect is sort of as like, even just as a protest of the people who have an issue with the way the election was going, I expect her to just get the role as the Debian project leader. Is she going to do a good job? I don't know. Probably. It can't be going any worse than the way Debian's already going. Honestly, man, Debian just fascinates me. It fascinates me that we have a project that is as important as Debian, and just nobody cares, like, at all about anything that happens with this project. So on that note, let me know your thoughts down below. I guess yeah, what do you think of what's going on? Are you a Debian user? Are you paying attention to what's going on with Debian? I'd love to know. So, if you liked the video, go like the video, go subscribe as well, and if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon Subscribes Daily Bearer Pay linked in the description down below. That's gonna be it for me, and maybe if we left the 90s, things would change. Probably not.
Something like this.